Hey there, you awesome VJ person. Recently, I had to do a last minute gig for an artist whose music quickly shifts between styles. It went from house to rap to hardcore to trap in a matter of minutes. With barely any prep time, no knowledge of the music, no MIDI clock, and no setlist, I decided I was just gonna tap along with the beat to make it look synchronized. I had this idea of creating a tap along effect that I could apply to a layer and control with a MIDI controller. I did the show and this actually worked really well. So I decided to do a tutorial on how to make these kind of effects yourself. The basic concept is that we use booleans and triggers to turn small effect chains on and off. Sometimes I will use booleans over triggers in this patch, because once we go to the arena side of things, we can use the piano trigger mode to temporarily hold an effect if needed. So we get to trigger or hold, which is a win-win situation. I am sticking to simplicity with only trigger style effects and no further parameters. I guess in a way we are making a preset based effect, but we'll be using randomization to create unique variations with each trigger. Let's jump into Wire and get started. For this tutorial, we'll be making an effect with 6 triggers. After we're done, you should have a pretty firm grasp on how to build your own. This system is completely modular, so let me know in the comments below what you have come up with. Alright, let's get started with the first effect in our chain, which will be the fisheye. First, we need to get a texture into our patch. I'll use the texture in node for that, leave it at the default settings, and we're going to run it into a fisheye effect. So this one is going to be really simple. We simply want to bounce this up and down on a trigger. So I'll create a trigger in, rename it to fish punch. I think that suits the name. And into an attack release, and that goes into the fisheye. So when I trigger, it blows up and slows down. So what the attack release node does is upon being triggered, it will run from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 0. So the 0 to 1 is over the attack time, which is currently set at 0.5, and back from 1 to 0 over the release time, which is currently set at 3. But if we're going to tap along to the beat, that is way too slow. So I'll put this to 0.1. You can even set it at 0, depending on what you like yourself, and 0.3 to slow it down. Now let's see, can I tap along with that? Yeah, maybe the attack time really at 0. Does that look better? I think it looks better if there's a small, yeah, that looks more bouncy. It's also something you could easily animate in Arena as well. All right, that is the first bit. To wrap it up, I'll create a comment node, disable fill, throw it over the whole patch. I'll say fish punch. Don't actually punch fishes, don't be an asshole. And set this to 30 just to make the patch more readable once we're done, because this is going to be a big patch. So moving on to the next bit, we want to do the whole RGB color channels shifting apart. The main node for that is the color offset node. So the color offset node will offset the red, green and blue channels over an X and Y channel, right? This can go in negative space as well, so you can move the channels around. We want to do this randomized and on the beat. So first of all, we're going to create another trigger in, and we're going to call it RGB Bash, RG Bash. I'm into cool names today. I'm a real edgelord over here. And we'll send this into a random node. Now, the random node by default creates a float value, but the color offset node wants a float too. So in the node panel, we can set the random node to generate a float 2 for us. And let's say we want to do 100 pixels of range. So I'll set it between -100 and 100. So when I pop this into the red channel, let's see. Yeah, so now the channels are getting shifted. The reason we are using a float 2 is because we get a different value for X and a different value for Y. Now, we don't want to do this. Send it to all the channels, because every channel will be moved equally and we will be just moving our texture, right? So that's not very handy. Instead, we'll be instancing the random node to have 3 instances. So now when I trigger it, it will generate 3 float 2 values. This is something I'm going to split into separate channels again, and each channel goes into here. We could have created 3 random nodes, but this is just a way cleaner way of patching. Let's make some space to pop this all in. So let's see. So now, upon a trigger, all our channels are getting shifted into a different direction. Nice. But now we want to have some sort of animation controlling this. For this, I'll create another attack release node. Again, our settings being something like this. You can tweak these settings yourself. And we're going to multiply everything in here with a single node, which results in this animation. Because by default we are multiplying with 0, which means this one becomes 0, 0, 0. And as we go up, it goes to 1, and we get the actual values. Let's see if I'm that fast. I'm not that fast. Right, so that's the color offset done. Again, put a nice comment box over it. Let's do a different color this time. Let's say I want to do blue. So just for readability's sake, that we can get a nice, well-documented patch out of this. So, and we're gonna move on to the next section. All right, for the next section, we're going to do the invert, which is a very simple little patch. We're going to take the output of our previous bit and we're going to invert it. So this will invert on a channel basis. So one would invert the red, green, blue, and finally the alpha channel. We're going to do this with a Boolean because you might want to hold the inversion effect for a little bit. And a Boolean is either true or false, either 1 or 0, which is convenient because we're using 0 and 1s here. You can do half inversions like this, but let's not get into that for now. So this node wants a float 4. So we're going to use our Boolean in to create a float 4. Float 4. We want to invert the X, Y, and Z, the red, green, and blue channels, and we do not ever want to touch the alpha channel because I'll show you what happens if you do. The alpha channel flips and you get a transparent image. So we don't want that. So now we can use a Boolean. Now you might ask yourself, why not simply bypass the effect on and off? Because these are numbers and numbers can be smoothed. So I'll do something like 0.3. And now our toggle is smooth, which just looks a lot nicer than turning the effect on and off. And because it's a Boolean, you can put it into piano mode in Arena and have the invert as long on as long as you're holding down the button. All right, so that was the invert. Let's move on to the next bit. So in that little cutaway, I have put the nodes into a box again and colorized them, as well as renamed the invert node and called this an RG bash. So we're moving on to the next one, which is a sort of liquify type of effect, which we'll do by creating a UV offset node and sending fractal noise into that. So let's pull that off, see what happens, turn it up. So this is the basic essence of it. Let's first get this more liquify effect, and then we can go into the animations. So what I first want to do is turn the amplitude down, which is basically making it less sharp, right? So it's basically sort of a sharpness. And I want to turn the density down, so we're closer to it. That already gives us very different vibe to it, but it's very sporadic in nature. There's only a bit of the image is distorted. So for that, I'll apply the absolute modifier, which gives us a lot more of the liquefaction effect. And then finally, we can sort of play around with the fractal noise algorithm. Maybe Perlin noise looks better, or simplex noise. I think actually the original one, value noise, looks the best for this. Let's adjust the density a little bit. So basically this is what we want to do on a button press. So to get started, we first want to animate the fractal noise. As we can see, it wants a float 3. So we'll start by creating a float 3. And then we can animate it using the Z-axis. And for this, I'm simply going to use a saw oscillator. Oh, that's the wrong note. A saw oscillator. This will animate, but it will cut at some point. Maybe, yeah, there was the cut. So to prevent that from happening, I'm simply gonna set the frequency very low, something like this, and the amplitude quite high, so repetitions are not as frequent, and we get our distortion. And we're gonna turn this on and off, right? So we're gonna be like something like this. All right, then we want to do this on a trigger. So let me quickly clean up the patch a little bit. So we want to turn this effect on and off, and I also want to be able to hold it. So again, I'm using a boolean. I'll call it Liquify. Is it spelled correctly? I think so. Liquify. And we're going to use, first we need to do some sort of animation. And for this, I will animate the gain, because at 0 gain, nothing happens. So we could do this, right? Turn it on, off, on, off. That would already work, because as we have learned, a false is a 0 and a true is a 1. But we are cool kids and we animate stuff, so we'll smooth this out. I think over direction of like 0.2. Let's see. So that's cool. What you could do is, if you don't want to run between 0 and 1, you could add a multiply and say like 0.5, so the max would be 0.5. Let's see how that looks. I actually kind of like the extreme distortion. So the multiply is optional. I'll leave it out. Now, every time we do this, you can see it always bends into the left top corner. That's because the multipliers are set to 1 and 1. If I set it to -1, -1, we're sort of bouncing into the right bottom corner, if I'm correct. But I want to randomize these multipliers. So how we're going to do that? We're going to take the Liquify node and set it to event flow. Next, we are going to connect it to an if node. And the reason we send it to event flow is because the if node only takes events. So if I would have a boolean and I want to connect it to here, it said that's incompatible flow. The if node only operates at event flow. So we take the if node and we're going to say if true. So if the button is pressed, we want to generate a random number. We're going to use the random node for this, right? The reason we're doing this is because if we won't, we also would be generating a number on turning the effect off again. And we don't want that because that will look a little bit wonky. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to generate a number between 0 and 4 with a precision of 1, which means it can generate the number 1, 2, and 3. 0, 1, 2, and 3. Those are the numbers that will be generated because we don't exclude the top. We don't include the max. Now, next we'll send this into a switch, and the switch generates float 2s for us, and we set the size to 4. Oh, Let's put that into the case. So now we will randomly switch between these cases. The cases we can put into here, and we're just going to say 1, 1, minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, 1, 1, minus 1. So basically we're switching between these 4 cases on every hit. Let's see how that looks if I turn the Liquify on and off. So you see we're pulling into different directions with each hit, which looks a lot cooler than pulling into a direction, into the same direction every frame. So that basically wraps it up. Again, I'll put it into a comment box and make it pretty, but I can do that while you guys are already cutting away from this scene. Let's go. All right, welcome back. I've quickly cleaned up our Liquify effect, and we're now moving on to the shredder bit. You saw that in the little jam I did, the lines that sort of distort the image up and down. This is going to be the most complex effect we're doing, but I hope you'll manage to tag along. So at the core of our patch is again a UV offset node. And we're going to need to create some sort of lines to push the image up and down. So what I'll do is we need to create a texture that consists out of lines. Again, we're doing this based on a trigger. Cool name time. Let's call it the shredder. Like it's a paper shredder, like up and down. I hope that makes sense. Let's put that into a random node. And we're going to create a random texture. As you might know, a texture consists out of 4 channels, a red, green, blue, and alpha channel. So we're going to set this to float 4 as well. Let's create a 2 texture. So it creates a color. Right now we're creating a 1 by 1 pixel. Basically, we're creating a random pixel right now. But we're going to create multiple lines. So I'll set it to, let's say, 24 instances. And now we're creating 24 random colors. Now, before you continue, we have to understand how the UV offset node works a little bit. The UV offset will offset the image based on the texture color. So green pixels will offset the image vertically, and red pixels will offset the image horizontally. And because I want to do this little shredder effect, I only actually want green colors. So I'll set the blue and the red channel to 0. And now we should have a range of green, like 50 shades of green. Sounds like a great nature documentary. Now we need to pump it up to a proper size. Right now it's a 24 by 1 texture. So I'll set the resolution mode to absolute. You can do absolute or relative. And now we have these really smooth looking lines, but we don't want smooth, we want blocky. So I'll set the sampling mode to nearest. And now we have lines that distort. Let's throw this into the UV offset and see what happens. So we're getting the shredder effect a little bit. Let's bump up the gain. Here we go. All right. That looks good to me. That's pretty shredderish. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do some smoothing again. And in this case, I will use a multiply. We have seen this trick before with an attack release. Seen this trick before. Multiply, set this one to like 0.1, 0.5. And see what happens. So now we bounce out and we bounce in, right? That looks good to me. What we want to do now is create another UV offset. I'll create a little hub node here just for readability's sake. UV offset. And this one will move into negative Y space. So when we trigger it, it moves down, right? So we have one clip bouncing up, one clip bouncing down. And now I'll use a video mixer to mix these two together. 100% opacity. Now we have this shredding apart effect. All right. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna animate the gain on both of the UV offset nodes. For this, we'll generate another random number anywhere between -1 and 1, and we want 2 of them. Now, there is a small chance that we get a really small number on the gain. Let's say 0.01. So I want to avoid that. So in case the value produced by the random node is between -0.1, or let's say 0.2, -0.2 and 0.2, if that is true, this outputs a Boolean, then we'll add the Boolean on top of it. So basically, if we end up with 0.15, we'll add a 1 on top of that. So the gain is never like super small. And then again, we're gonna split this. 1 is going into the gain of the first UV offset and the second UV offset. So now we have randomized our gain, so the effect doesn't look the same all the time. And it's possible that both sides go up. We can have this open and close effect. Now to wrap this up, we're gonna do a little bit of trail. So for this I'll do a feedback loop. Inputs set to 3. Let's move these up, this down, and patch the video mixer back into itself. And now when we trigger it and move this up a little bit, we get the trails when there is transparency. I think that's just a neat little like motion blur, neat little effect. All right. I'll wrap this up, clean this up, give it a name, etc., and I'll be with you for the next bit. All right, we're back. I have cleaned up and named the shredder bit, and all good things must come to an end. Also this tutorial, so we'll wrap up the final bit, which is like the pop-up effect, which is quite simple to make. To do this, we'll create another video mixer. The video mixer is basically our effect. From the video mixer, we'll create a transform node, and the transform node goes back into the video mixer. And if we increase the scale, we will have this infinite growing effect, right? So what we'll do is add a simple Boolean, and I'll call it pop, and input it into the opacity. So when it's off, nothing happens. When it's on, it will infinitely grow. And of course, you can either piano this or just bash the button and have it done. So that's basically the whole pop section. It's a super simple patch, but it's at the end, so it doesn't influence the other effects. So let's wrap this let's wrap this up. Texture out, so we actually have an end to our effect chain. Patch, I already given it a name. Have to set it to the effect. Maybe I want to sort this, like have the triggers together and the booleans together. So I'll save this and I'll catch you in Arena and see what we have made. All right, welcome back to Arena with our head bouncing samurai guy. The effects all seem to work properly. We have it going on here. So let's do quick shortcut making. I'll use keyboard. You can use MIDI if you like. Let's remove these. I'll say Z, X, C. And then for the Booleans, F, and make sure to enable piano, B, piano, pop, piano, shortcuts, exit. And now I can bash along with music. And like I said, the Liquify ones and the pop and the invert, you can hold them for as long as you like. And the other one, the effects are trigger based, so they're ones. One cool thing about it, you can hit multiple buttons at the same time. So I can do distortion and RGB or RG bash for the cool kids out there, or just like hit everything at once. So you can get pretty wild with this. Put a beat under it and go to town. Let's look at another clip. Yeah. That looks pretty cool. And of course you can, for now, we made the effect as a tap along kind of effect, but there's nothing stopping you from adding an envelope and doing a 4 to the floor BPM synced effects with it as well. So that works too, right? So this was quite a long tutorial. I had a lot of fun making this stuff. I hope you learned something from it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I will see you in the next tutorial.